Hi everybody, I'm Mike Shoemaker. I'm a professor in the PT program. And I'm also a co-chair with Andy Booth.
Andy Booth, PA program.
From the PA program of the MyPerk Simulation Work Group. Is that what we're called? That's what we're called. So here's the big picture for you. You guys are in for a treat. I think tonight will be a whole lot of fun. So how did this start? Well, one of the things that we, as the simulation work group, collaborating with the pipes group, trying to do is to try to put on a simulation for the pipes group once in the fall and once in the spring. We were a little slow to sort of pull things together and trying to figure out what we wanted to do, and then the idea came to us that the athletic trainers wanted to be involved in the simulation and wanted to somehow incorporate EMT and paramedics into that simulation. So that's really where this started. And then what we typically do is we're developing interprofessional simulations is we start with some idea and then we sort of branch out from there and say, okay, that's awesome. How can we make an athletic training and EMT simulation be interprofessional and inclusive of other health professions? Right? And as we try then, we say, okay, well, and what objectives do we want to work toward? And Samantha's going to go over with you in a bit the interprofessional education collaborative objectives related to interprofessional collaboration. And so we start to decide, well, what objectives do we want to look at for this simulation? In thinking about it, we're typically aiming towards roles and responsibilities, helping you to understand the roles and responsibilities and scope of practice and knowledge and skills and training of other professions, because that makes you that much better at being able to seamlessly coordinate and collaborate with those other professions. So with that in mind, what can we do with a simulation with AT and with EMS, but somehow include other professions? So that's where we then look to every good TV crime drama and we rip things from the headlines. And we started with, well, what about the Grand Rapids Drive, right? So Grand Rapids Drive, there's a player who collapsed on the court and nobody provided help. This player died. Well, do you think in the whole stadium there wasn't a healthcare provider? Like, what happened that nobody jumped in to help? And then more recently on Thursday, there was a motor vehicle, not quite an accident, went off the road, had a heart attack. A volunteer firefighter initially responded, a PT student responded, and then a nurse responded. And so I think, if nothing else tonight, also brings an immediacy about this topic, because you just don't know when you're going to come upon a scene. And as a healthcare provider who's not just simply trained in CPR and basic life support, right? You're also a healthcare provider, and so you bring an additional set of knowledge and skills that might be helpful depending on the scenario. And I think there's an ethical duty and obligation that you carry to respond. And so I think, if nothing else, tonight's discussion will sort of help improve the likelihood of you responding to an event and hopefully improve the quality with which that you can respond. So the scenario that you guys are going to develop, so rather than doing a sim, we thought, what if we have you guys develop the simulation? Because that's going to do two things. One is we'll then have a simulation that we can actually run in the spring. The second thing is, in developing the simulation, you'll have that opportunity to interact with and dialogue with people from other professions and learn about the roles and responsibilities of those other professions, which is exactly the objective that we're trying to accomplish. So what we'll be doing in a little bit, as soon as we're done with the objectives, and then I think an introduction to EMS, once Ted gets here. What you're going to be doing is we're going to break you up into smaller interprofessional groups. And your job is to design a simulation that starts with a basic framework of you as a healthcare provider are at a sporting event. It's called a high school sporting event. When you witness let's call it a fan like let's say one of the parents, have an event. Now they're not unconscious, right? But they're clearly altered, and they're clearly having issues. And the athletic trainer is not close by. Now the athletic trainer will be coming, right? But you as a healthcare provider have a duty to respond. And so we're not going to tell you what the problem is with that patient case. That's for you guys to develop, because the way you develop that case helps determine the way in which healthcare providers who respond might interact. And in thinking ahead to the spring when we actually run this simulation, how can you design the progression of that simulation so that the professions participating learn about one another? And so the general progression will be several healthcare providers respond. They start working on the problem. Then at some point, the athletic trainer responds, right? And then at some point, EMS arrives on scene. And so how you develop that case, how you try to structure the case to facilitate communication among those initial healthcare providers as they're trying to problem solve, how you foresee the athletic trainer arriving on scene and what you expect of those healthcare providers to communicate with that athletic trainer. How do they transition that care to the athletic trainer taking charge of that scene? And then up to and including also when EMS arrives. How do those healthcare provider responders and or the athletic trainer provide a handoff to EMS? And what is it that EMS expects to hear from those providers, right? What do they want to hear? What's helpful to them? Because that's going to help you be a better first responder and better help with that handoff. And then start to gain insight into, well, what does that look like with EMS in terms of their initial assessment and preparation for transport. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And again, you're trying to design a simulation in a scenario that's going to promote interprofessional learning later. But tonight, in designing the simulation, you're going to have that opportunity to also have a lot of interprofessional learning. So that's the big picture of what we're doing tonight.
A couple things that come to my mind. How many people in here already have some sort of BLS certification or ACLS certification? Yeah, you guys don't count. I know you guys. Raise them high. Raise them high. So that's probably 80% of the people in here. Okay, that's good.
And those that don't, are you going to be required to by
I think
nature
it's
of your
probably
profession?
part of your program, right? That you have to get a BLS at least.
I don't know what that acronym is.
Basic life support,
Okay.
CPR.
CPR.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then yes.
Sorry. There's a jargon alert. There's a great point whenever we're doing things interprofessionally. Sometimes people use terminology you don't know, right? Some terminology that's specific to that profession. Excellent point of raising your hand and saying, I don't know what that means. That's a really, really important part when you're in your groups, when somebody says, oh, we need to do this, we need to get this AED. Well, what's an AED? You need to do that component things. Two, we're going to be putting you together in groups, or you're going to be forming groups, but also think about people that might not be here. You don't have to specifically create a simulation that is only involving those that are in the room tonight. Those of you that have been to PIPES events in the past know that we get all sorts of different students at varying times of the year. So try to create a scenario or try to create a simulation that might involve as many professions as you can. Okay. And the third point, it goes back to the beginning, what Lisa was talking about is that you guys actually could have a rather clear advantage to doing the simulation design competition because you're going to be practicing tonight, right? So you can put this together tonight. We'll give you some critique on it. We're going to be helping you along. That's a really good head start on the other teams to get that cash prize, right? For the MyPerk conference. So keep that in mind when you get done doing the scenario. Maybe it's something that you can get together with that initial group that you were with tonight and create a simulation scenario for the MyPerk competition. So.
Did you say cash money?
Cash money. Cash money in the hand.
All right. So Ted is the director at Life EMS. And I'm not sure, he's not here. However, we have 3 EMS students
Here we go.
who didn't know they'd be called upon for a brief impromptu introduction.
We're good. We don't know what we're going to get into every day of our lives,
So
so.
here goes.
There you go.
So this will just be a great chance. What we're going to ask them to do is just sort of share a little bit about what the course of training looks like for EMS. And then we might open it up for a couple of questions, and then we'll sort of break off into groups and then get ahead with the simulation piece. So we'll turn it over to you guys. So if you could introduce yourselves and say a little bit about kind of what does the course look like to becoming an EMT and a paramedic. What's the difference? What do those routes look like and whatnot?
Go ahead.
All right, guys. My name's Crystal Donikoski. I actually work as an EMT basic for Life EMS. I think I'm the only one here that does that, but yeah. I've been a basic for about 2 years. When I first wanted to go to school, I looked into Great Lakes. It was one of the only programs at the time here in the Grand Rapids area without going to like a big college and getting an actual degree. It is not a degree, it's a certification, but when you're out there in the field, that really doesn't matter. It took me 6 months, twice a week in class to get that certification, and then we had to go through our national testing. That's a practical, so we go to a station and you run through about 6 scenarios with people you don't know, and then you go and take your state test. Once you, well, it's called your national test, it's your NREMT test. Once you pass that, you can apply for your state license. After your state license, then you can apply to work for EMS. I also decided last year that I was going to go on to medic, so that's the next step. As a basic, you are basic skills, no IVs, no med pushes. I mean, you're looking at just basic CPR and yeah, literally we're the ambulance drivers on a lot of it. Like it's kind of sad to think of it that way because we really get upset when you guys just call us ambulance drivers because we do a lot more than that. Especially when you're working out on the truck with your medic, you are learning and doing skills under their scope that helps you. Like we assist in medication pulls, hooking up EKGs, doing that stuff. And as you progress through your medic and your knowledge, you get to learn how to do all that stuff. Medic school is anywhere from 1 year if you take the accelerated course through Great Lakes to a 2-year program, depending on where you go. A lot of community colleges and different colleges, it's a 2-year degree. For Great Lakes, I'm in the accelerated course currently. It's June to June. You guys are what, September to?
22 months.
Yes, 22 months, so it's just under 2 years. We cover the same stuff, I just cover it quicker. Yeah, a lot more stress, but the schedule worked out a little better. So, and again, once we pass the class, you again have to go to an external source and take the practical test. It's just a lot more evasive. We cover everything from cardiac stations to out-of-hospital scenarios, IV starts, med pushes. Medics are the ones that you see, like you see them on TV, we're the ones that are starting the IVs, running the critical patients, putting CPAPs on people, doing the stuff that you want to do to save lives, to make the difference. The basic is literally just the backup and the helper. So it's a good way to get into starting it, but if you really want to make a difference, this is where you start. And a lot of people, once they've been doing the medic for multiple years, they want to continue to move up. That's when you see them do a bridge program to the RN and PA and different medical stuff. This is a good way to get yourself the experience to be able to put yourself out there. I mean, it's much cheaper to go get your EMT license and realize after doing it for about 6 months, you really don't like medical than it is to like go through 2 to 4 years, get a big kid degree and realize I hate this and be thousands of dollars in debt. I know that sounds terrible, but it's the truth and reality. Do you guys have any questions for us?
I'd like to expand a little bit.
Go ahead.
My name is Tyler Seaman. I've been in EMT for 6 years now. Going through Great Lakes' medic program, I'm in the little bit slower of a course because, well, it works better with my work schedule. We do have 3 levels on the truck. Usually you see a medic, or a medic basic. However, we do have a intermediate. Some places call it an EMT-I, intermediate. Some people call it a specialist. It's just, yeah, or
Just Michigan
advanced.
doesn't recognize it.
With that, you start learning IVs and basic administrations and stuff like that. So there is a step in the middle to where if you kind of want to do a little bit less than be a medic, you can be the advanced, or you can choose to go on from there to continue to be a medic. But yeah, like Crystal said, it's a lot of driving for the basics. There are some basic airways that, like, for out of hospital, it might seem, well, for in hospital, it might seem a little weird that we're able to do it out of hospital. We do have some basic airway adjuncts that we are allowed to insert, like the king tubes, the LMAs, or I don't know. LMA is kind of going out out of
Depends
hospital.
on which county you work
But
in.
the IGLs are coming in their place. So we are allowed to put some tubes down people's throats, but they're more, those are the basic ones. They're real, yeah, they're super glottic. They're easy to put in. You do them blind. It's not the actual intubation that you see for the most part with people coming in with tubes. That is a medic skill that, well, for now, they're trying to take that away, but we'll see how that goes. But other than that, Crystal pretty well covered it.
My 2 cents worth, and it's kind of what we're going through right now in the first segment for your medic. And that is the knowledge obviously increases quite a bit for what a medic is expected to be able to do, and that is differential diagnosis, if you will.
There he is.
Not technically to talk.
Is he having a stroke or is he having a diabetic episode? So you start looking at things a little bit deeper and trying to figure out what's really going on. So you're stepping your game up a bit, and it just continues on from there.
All right, Ted, you can join us.
Yep, now you get to do your speech.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you guys talk about already?
It's okay, just elaborate on all your stuff.
Yeah.
We just, the differences between EMT and medic and
Okay.
education-wise, what it
Okay.
takes. Just
Okay.
basic.
A little bit of what we can do.
Okay.
And introduce yourself, please.
Yeah.
Okay, will do.
Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Tevin Salkma. I'm the Director of Operations for Life EMS in Grand Rapids, so that would be like all of our Kent County and Ottawa County operations. So forgive me if I repeat stuff, sorry I'm late. So yeah, I guess a little bit about what EMS is, kind of what we do. So, you know, EMS really is, you know, everything from first response to the ambulance that comes and transports patients to the hospital. One of the things I think that's important for tonight is how we work with bystanders and how that kind of integrates into what we do. We actually get a lot of information from the bystanders that can be on a scene, whether that be a family member or somebody who witnessed an accident or witnessed an injury, anything like that. So, you know, if you happen to be a bystander and you happen to be around and know some information about a patient, we kind of look to you guys to tell us that information. That can be very helpful. One of the things I think that is important to note is that as a bystander and having medical training, which most, I would assume, probably everyone in here does to a certain extent, is that, you know, if we need help and we ask you to help, you can help us. I think that's one of the things that some people kind of get scared of. You know, can I help? What can I do? By all means, let us know if there's some, you know, if you can help us, or if we kind of, you know, typically it's just 2 of us on a scene in the ambulance. If there are first responders around, feel free to kind of let us know who you are and what you can do, and we might put you to work. So, yeah, so we work in the ambulance industry. We transport people to the hospital. That's our form of business. You know, we work well with our first responders, typically associated with a fire department or a police department. So if you're at a scene, typically you'll see those departments first, then you'll see the ambulance coming by, and then we'll transport patients to the hospital. So, thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. Again, sorry I was late. Thank you to the Great Lakes students for being here too.
Does anybody have any questions for EMS before we move on? Mike?
What sort of training do you guys get on the incident command system and the national incident management system? I mean, you guys, is that typically only a director level thing, or I mean, where do you guys sort of fit in?
We have all of our providers trained at least at a basic entry level with ICS. All the courses are done through FEMA, so they're all offered online. So depending on kind of what level you are within an organization, depends on kind of how much training you get. Most of that training is free. There's some in-seat courses that you can take, which are very beneficial. But we all have that training to a certain extent. And the whole idea of that is so that if we get on a large chaotic scene, that we're all speaking the same language, we all understand the basic structure, who fits where, who reports to who, and it just makes things run a lot smoother.
And I asked that question because one thing that will also be happening is a mass casualty simulation in the spring.
The one at...
The one we're thinking about maybe that includes GVSU.
Sure, yeah, I think it's in the spring. Yep.
Yeah, so just something to think about as a healthcare provider, that there's additional training you can get and certification you can get, because you right now can't really just as a healthcare provider walk up in a mass casualty and say, hey, I'm here, use me. Depending on how desperate they are, they may not want to use you unless you have some basic training and know how to fit into the flow of the incident command system. So if that's something you're interested in as a future healthcare provider, look into those extra training opportunities that allow you to be able to truly and officially and formally join those efforts as they develop.
And then with that, if you sign up for something like that, then you might be able to join larger groups where you're actually deployed to mass disasters across the country.
So we just have a brief overview for you guys about simulation and education, just to get you guys thinking a little bit before you break out in your groups and you start writing the simulation. So you know a little bit maybe what that template is talking about. So what is simulation? It's an educational strategy which on a particular set of conditions are created or replicated. We create and incorporate different modalities, we call them, to make it more realistic. So we use props and pictures, we use moulage or theater makeup to do burns and things like that. So we try to make it as realistic as possible. It's done through task trainers, mannequins, standardized patients, virtual technology. We record a lot of these events that we do. And then there's always a briefing and a debriefing. So you guys will see in your packet when you break out in your groups, at the end there's debrief questions. So that is a huge part of the simulation process where students or anyone participating would reflect on the process of it. Sorry. And then advantages of simulation. One of the biggest things that we try to bring across is that it's a safe environment to learn. So we really hope that you guys will get something out of this, and in writing the simulation that you'll come back in the spring and participate in it and know that's a safe environment for anybody to just come in and learn and improve their skills and then be able to go out and the hospital, the real world, and actually do those skills that they learned with it. And what's really great about simulation is we just had it last week with our nursing students. They can practice doing a code here, and then they can go out in the hospital, and if it happens, hopefully they know a little better what to do in that situation. Just a couple key terms that you might want to think about while you're writing your scenario. A mannequin, do you want to use a mannequin for this scenario? Do you want to use a standardized patient or a real person? Do you want there to be confederates, which a confederate would be like a bystander or a mom or a dad that can also be paid by a standardized patient as well. Moulage, if they're going to have makeup or a burn or scrape, something like that. That's kind of going on. And so then with designing the simulation, you want to look at who are your learners. Are these senior level students? Are they first level students? Maybe what their knowledge would be. Determine your learning objectives. Determine the case. Set the scene, your equipment and moulage. The methodology that we talked about, the mannequin or standardized patient. And then you outline the scenario progression and you end with your debrief. So this designing of the sim is basically what's in your guys' packet. And then one of the things that you want to know when writing a simulation is to write SMART objectives. So they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So just think about that when you guys are going through. We don't really want you in this particular time to have to write out 3 to 5 objectives. We more want you guys to go off of the IPEC core competencies, which is in your packet. So like we had talked about earlier, we focus a lot on roles and responsibilities with our interprofessional events, but there's also value in ethics, interprofessional communication, and teams and teamwork. So think about when you're writing your simulation, what one of these do you want to focus on, or you can focus on a couple of them. So I'll leave that up for you guys to see, and now we'll break you guys out in groups. I believe we kind of divided you guys by disciplines when you came in. So I'll have Lisa talk about that, and then we'll break out in our little sessions.
If you're not done,
I think we did good too.
We don't think about it, yeah, it was just like, we don't actually think about any of it at all, but our big thing is slow to
it's
go.
even better if you don't want to be done, because that means you guys are enjoying yourselves. Frankly, that's A-okay.
Yeah, so I would
But
say from a
we
public
are
standpoint, that should be
almost
something to
dying
do, because that might
to
affect
hear
someone
what you
else.
came up with.
Yes. No, seriously.
So,
Yeah. it's-
I am the king of bad and untimely puns and expressions. Let's start up in the back corner. Just a quick sort of report out about your case, how you sort of expect that scene to go, and then hopefully, as you communicate that, it'll be self-evident maybe is how that case is going to sort of bring allow each profession to bring something to the table. So take it away.
Lauren, go for it.
All right, so basically our idea was a day at the ballpark in a high school setting. A fan gets hit in the face by a ball, so that way you're getting the trauma, concussion protocol, all of that. Then we have it transitioning into an altered level of consciousness, and then the patient becomes combative, and then after they become combative, then they lose more consciousness to the point of a seizure, so then you have that point happening, that next complication happening, I guess, and then after that, him just coming to, and what we would do after that. We had, the idea was that like the nurses and the PTs would be like the first responders in the stands. The AT would most likely be there for the game, so then they would be coming in after that, and then we didn't have the EMTs come until the seizure to make it a little bit more hard.
Okay.
Yeah, and then to implement public health, we were trying to make that situation like during the debriefing, talk about how it worked, what we liked, what we didn't like, and then they can help us determine how to fix our EAP for preventative measures.
Interesting.
Let's go.
You know what? If you figured out how to pull public health into an emergent event, then you just won. That's $500 cash.
Split amongst.
Excellent. So I love that you're thinking about how do you use the debriefing to pull in other disciplines.
Yeah.
What was sort of the timing of how far do the non-ATs get into the assessment and the response before the AT shows up on
I like
scene?
the background, the patient background from the family, calming the crowd to clear the way, that kind of a thing.
Okay.
Patient history from family.
Okay, very good. And then rendering of first aid, just simple stuff, stop bleeding, and then the assessment of neurologic status and stuff then occurs when the AT is on scene. How do you envision, so, if you ran this sim and you're debriefing, you sort of have a vision of how you think it should go. What sort of questions do you ask, and then, what other ways would the AT utilize the other healthcare providers? Like when things start getting crazy, when would you want them to call for EMS? Sort of what do you think the answer key is to that one?
During the debriefing, you're saying?
Yeah, you sort of bring those points out in the debriefing, so you have sort of how you envision it should have gone.
Okay.
And it may, when it comes to sim, it usually doesn't go the way you envisioned it.
Emergency room.
Yeah, we kind of talked about like maybe longer term, like if something happened to where like EMS came and then they took the patient to like the emergency room, then that can also like, it would kind of like skip the debriefing and like it would make the nurses at the hospital, like that transferred care would happen. I don't know if that answers the question though.
No, it doesn't. That does relate to another, as we were thinking about today. Did we want to bring it to the progression of the handoff from EMS to the hospital? We decided not to. But yeah, so more, I guess, two parts. One is, where do you envision in that scenario those providers should call EMS? And after you have arrived on scene as an AT, you know, how else could you utilize other healthcare providers? I mean, is the scenario getting out of hand where it's helpful to have a second person standing by?
Yeah.
You want to, you know, direct somebody to go flag down EMS at the entrance? You know, what kind of things like that?
I mean, yeah, we were kind of imagining like with the blowout fracture, so like to the orbit, you would need to be caring for concussion and like that trauma already anyway, so then they would be called pretty immediately.
Okay.
Yeah. But we were just like having them arrive during like the seizure part of it to have that transition, but yeah.
We had talked about like incorporating the extra set of hands, because he theoretically would be like in a baseball seat or something like that, so having him like to get up and kind of lay flat on the ground to get him sideline and stuff like that for a safe position, that like we would be extra hands in that scenario during that point. And then like once the EMT is there, we could help with the debrief part and the handoff and stuff.
Yeah.
Probably
Awesome.
calling when the patient became combative, because it was an altered state of mental capacity would probably be enough to be like, yeah, let's call EMS. Yeah.
And anything for EMS when you arrive, what would you look for as you're, you know, sort of judging the participants in the sim? What would you want to see those participants do in terms of that handoff to you when you get to that scene?
Well, the waivers are definitely a good idea. The person, hey, over here. I mean, one of them's usually sufficient. We don't need 9 people all outside. But yeah, usually, I mean, that's a good thing unless like fire's already on scene or whatever. And then space is a big thing, is having space to work. And then being able to, if the information's there of any medical histories, any progression of from where, you know, incident started to where we're at now, and just that sort of information and like what happened, who saw it, like tell me exactly what you saw, how did it react, how this patient become from here to here, and what we're looking at. And if there's like ATs, I don't know if they do blood pressure or anything like that, but like vitals, if there's any changes in vitals from the time that, you know, that started to the time that we're here now.
I have one quick follow-up question. Did you guys identify an IPAC competency, an area for your sim that you'd be?
All of them?
Was that all of them?
Yeah, we
Okay.
really could argue that all of them would be
Okay.
involved.
Communication, probably.
Communication would be one of the bigger ones,
Yeah.
especially what you guys got to talk about, for sure. That's what
Because
my
there's
brain
so
was
many
going.
like transfers of care and like the hope that each professional is like using their skills to help that next professional do whatever they need to do.
Okay, good. This year.
All right, well,
Good luck.
it's gonna be hard to top that one, but, so we didn't exactly name our patient, but the scenario we got is we have a high school basketball game going on, and the patient has a hypoglycemic episode, and he ends up falling and fracturing, having a compound fracture with his forearm. And then this person is a 50-year-old male, father of a basketball player who is, I think we said he's gonna be Japanese, or Chinese, sorry. And then he's there with his wife who speaks minimal English, and he does not speak English at all. So we kind of threw a little twist in it. So how the scene's gonna progress, I guess we said we were gonna start with the PTs and the OTs being there first as like the first responders. They're gonna take the vitals, they're gonna kind of eval the scene, ABCs, and then hopefully they'll call EMS, kind of get things started, noticing that it's a compound fracture and we gotta get things rolling. They're also gonna find out that pretty quick that the man doesn't know how to speak English. So they gotta figure out how to communicate. If the wife has very minimal English, then maybe they can go ahead and find the actual player who's playing and say, hey, we got a scenario going on, we need your help. So yeah, they're gonna take the initial information, and then the PT is also gonna help out by taking some neuroscience and vital signs as well. Nursing is kind of gonna add on, going like the head to toe assessment, and they're gonna be doing a fun, like kind of for the evaluation of the neurocognitive and the vital assessments. And then we got the ATs that are going to come on. The AT are pretty much going to stabilize the fracture, and then they're going to be followed by the medical student, and the medical students are going to assist with, since they know more about like the hypoglycemic situation, they can kind of help us out with their controlling bleeding, what we should do in that situation. And then after that, hopefully EMS arrives, and by then, hopefully we kind of calm down the situation and we can get the patient transported. But I think the biggest difficulty we're going to have is the fact that since the patient doesn't speak English, and then everyone's kind of getting information from either the kid or from the mom, transferring that information from one person to the next would probably be our hardest thing.
Okay.
But yeah.
We also mentioned debriefing with like the family, so whether it's the wife or child or whatever, so that they also know kind of what's going on and what we're doing, and once they're being transferred to EMS, you know,
Which
we're
are
not just like,
debriefing of the scenario itself with the bystanders, okay.
So maybe this is a good time to ask this question. So you have these different people coming on scene. Is the expectation that if it's a healthcare provider offering assistance that they state specifically their licensed profession? That they just say that they're BLS trained or first aid CPR trained? What are you sort of envisioning in terms of what's the expectation for participants who are thrown into this scenario to how should they introduce themselves?
Well, I don't know. I've had it happen once, then we've kind of heard stories of when we'd have someone from the stands come and say like, I'm a doctor or I'm whatever. But then we've had situations where the person is actually a doctor in the medical field. They have like a doctor in sociology or something like that.
Fabulous.
So I guess being like more specific.
Is it Ross Geller?
So I guess just kind of being like more specific in the specific degree that they have and not standard doctors, and then what they're able to do. Because I mean, if they were doctors or they studied first aid, but they got their first aid degree 20 years ago, is that really going to be as sufficient as the person who took first aid 5 months ago?
So the skills they can offer is maybe more important than the discipline. Interesting.
I'd like to expand on that. Yeah, we've seen it in the field quite a bit that you arrive on scenes and there's doctors that are there and they say, I'm a doctor, you're going to do this. Well, what is your discipline? And then you find out that there's something off the wall like orthodontics or whatever with a head injury or an open leg fracture. Like what he was saying with what you're licensed as or what you're actually willing to do or know to do would probably be the most helpful.
It could be an idea for a Confederate where we actually throw in a different, and sometimes in simulations, we try to sometimes throw in a little curveball in there. It could be a
Confederate doctor.
Yeah, that's right.
See how far they can sort of take the scene and it becomes apparent they don't know what they're doing. That'd be a fun twist.
Did you guys have an IPEC competency that you're looking at in particular? Again, probably all. Teamwork, I think that's where I went with this group, where that one kind of focused a little bit more, had step-by-step progression, but it was that teamwork of how they were doing things, and I've already done this, so you now are doing this, all having a different responsibility when it came to this scenario.
Especially with something like a conference, they might need someone else to kind of say what doing something, you need to do a lot of working teamwork stuff.
So, Lisa, do you think we can simulate a dinner fork deformity? With forearm?
Get working on your moulage there. You gotta have fake bones. All right, how about this group?
Okay, so we have Pat, he's at a sporting event, stands up, he gets dizzy, falls down the bleachers. The nurse, they get dizzy because he has uncontrolled type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
But we don't know that yet.
Yep.
Falls down the stairs, hits his head, contains a head injury as well as a leg injury. The medical student, physical therapist, and nurse all show up on the scene as bystanders in the crowd. And kind of what that group said, they would create like a space for the patient, the injured person, and the AT will be on the scene because they're at the sporting event, And then they would come up and provide equipment, provide splinting materials, bandaging, and emergency care. Due to his diabetes, he has poor neural function in his leg as well as blood circulation. So we know that he has a leg injury, but we aren't exactly sure what it's supposed to be because of his altered state now, this hyperglycemic event and that injury. And then EMS is activated to take it from there.
How else were you guys thinking about using the non-AT professions in that scene? Was it really just the crowd control piece, or how do you envision that?
Assess the cognitive status real quick, like just to do a quick cognitive screen to see what's going on and like assess the head wound, if it was bleeding or not. And then they obviously had to notice that he had an altered mental state and then call.
And that was a trigger for the EMS.
And then how do you envision, maybe to get this far, in terms of how far in the assessment of the problem is the AT and the other health care providers going to get before EMS comes versus EMS coming with equipment, the glucometer, etc.?
We had kind of talked about the athletic trainer would get as far as splinting the leg injury. We didn't specify what leg injury, but it would most likely be a fracture within the leg, so the AT would get as far as splinting that, and wound cleanup for the head injury as well, if there was a.
We were wondering if AT would have a glucometer so that we could check. We'd find out that he has type 2 diabetes from like a family member or somebody in the crowd who would know him. But yeah, we were trying to figure out how we would check that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Standard AT kit would have glucometer?
Yes.
Yeah, usually if you have a patient that you know that has it.
In our
but we're AT. Wait, so even like the AT, you're not considering that that AT would be there at the event already?
This is just a random.
Okay.
Gotcha.
But you'd still typically have that?
Yes,
Okay.
Typically,
No,
yeah.
but
Typically?
Okay.
Well, we would look at different times.
Right.
So like if.
There's no spectator.
That was the first thing we jumped to.
Right. And you said hyperglycemia? And so would a standard AT kit also have insulin then? Or would that not be something the AT would do? So
No, because it's something that's provided by a student athlete that you can't use.
We don't even do it.
Nope. That's what I said.
Wait, what?
We
do
don't.
insulin.
No.
Nope.
It's not in our protocol.
Nope. We have it in our scenario. We discussed.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
That's the goal for me tonight. My takeaway is I thought for sure you guys would be able to bring insulin to the scene. No.
Nope.
Wow. Awesome.
We can fix low blood sugar, but we have to go to the.
You have glucose though.
Yeah. But that's only gonna help their well.
Right.
And gluconeogenesis.
Fascinating. Okay. This is why we do these events. All right. Last
Ours
group.
is strawberry, it's not that terrible.
Take it away.
Let's
All
go.
right,
Come on.
so we have Paul Bunyan, who's a 47-year-old male. So ours was at a high school basketball game. Again, type 2 diabetes, not under control, high blood sugar. Gets super crazy rowdy, jumps up, but then has a syncopal episode, hits his head, so again like theirs, but his causes a seizure.
Okay.
And he also has an open head wound from hitting his head. So we had the PTs and the nurse be the primary assessment. We said that they could do, what was it? Okay, so they could do the level of consciousness, a rapid trauma assessment, and they could do respiratory and pulse, because those are the only vital things that they would have access to, just in the stand.
Yep.
And they would call EMS, so they would be the ones, obviously, to make that call. It's a seizure, so they're gonna do it right away. Also, they had people surrounding him right when it happened, because obviously it's just going to form a crowd. So we had them, originally, anyone that was extra, kind of clearing the area to have space. Hopefully someone would be trying to find the athletic trainer. We also made ours during halftime, so the athletic trainer wouldn't be in the gym with them. So you have to go find them probably in the athletic training dress. Who knows?
And that's real. I mean, I was at an event, and
Yeah.
that was exactly it. Like, the athletic trainer, it was after the game, I think, but she was way off
Mhm.
in the locker room.
So once the AT was brought in, they would have to bring the AT up to speed with everything that they found vitals-wise, level of consciousness, and the rapid trauma assessment. So then things that athletic trainers would have would be a blood pressure cuff and a pulse oximeter, as well as the blood glucose monitor. So we could do all of those things if they found a diabetic tag or were talking to family members or friends that knew they were diabetic. So we would be doing that as well. We would also do probably a C-spine evaluation to rule out whether they need to be backboarded or not. We said that they would find that it wasn't a C-spine injury, so we could move them to the floor for easier access once EMS got there. Once EMS got there, we would bring EMS up to speed. Again, telling them blood glucose and the vitals that they found. They would redo everything that we did, like we redid everything that they did. I'm sorry, I forgot your name again.
Crystal.
Crystal brought up that they can't do insulin either, so they would do IV push fluids to try and bring them back down to normal. So.
Diluted. Okay.
Also, the debriefing, because we got a public health person as well. She brought up the mental aspect of anybody that was there and witnessed that in the crowd, how that might affect them. So we might need to bring that into
like
consideration.
debrief with whoever.
Debrief with whoever they need to.
Because it could emotionally like mess with just a witness in the crowd that.
It's tough.
Normally, like
Yeah.
EMS, we don't think about that at all. Like, maybe we debrief amongst each other when we have to, when there's something that's really bad happening, but you don't ever think about like just a witness seeing that, what that could take them home to.
Yeah.
So, that brought up a really good idea and issue that maybe we should look at addressing.
Fascinating. And so then from a transport standpoint, so now here's maybe the learning for all of us, because one of the things I promised at least my students was demystifying EMS. So you guys will come on scene, right? And you'll get vitals, and you'll get blood glucose. You're going to do something to intervene on the hyperglycemia by just pushing fluids, right? And then for you guys from there on out, it really is a matter of just continuing to manage bleeding, right? And then being ready to go guns if you needed to, right? But that's it. Otherwise, then you're just basically the safe transport who can escalate if needed. Is there anything else you offer in those cases as you both prepare for and transport a patient like that?
We would do cardiac monitor.
Yeah.
Recovery.
We did talk about
We
that.
talked about that as well.
This is a
Single
single
episode would
episode.
indicate for that, so.
Okay.
Calm down, Ted.
So again, you're sort of that skilled mind, and that's the reason why if we're in an outpatient clinic and we have a patient who's having issues, right, and the spouse says, no, don't call the ambulance, we want to drive them to the ER ourselves, that's the unwise move, right, because they aren't ready to jump in and intubate and compress and defibrillate. Should that happen?
Well, a lot of it for us is we come on scene knowing that patient had a syncopal episode or that there's something else going on. You really almost have to just be a detective and try to figure out why. You have to rule it out. Literally, I'm going to think that everything is going wrong, starting with probably stroke or cardiac event, because those are the worst things. I'd rather start there and then realize it's just like something small, like their sugar's just a little off because they ate too many candy bars. You know what I mean? You always go big and then you narrow it down, but we really have to like just literally throw the kitchen sink at everybody and try to figure out what's really wrong. And by putting a cardiac monitor on, double checking sugar, maybe they just needed a little bit of fluid, maybe they just needed some oxygen. It could be something simple like that, but we have to kind of just work our way through it and figure it out, solve the crime essentially.
Yeah. PT students demystified, did we do it? Did we accomplish that?
Katie, did you want to chat a little bit about your group?
So we have 8 people online. We have a med student, a couple nurse practitioner students, clinical dietetics, and our scene started out with a 55-year-old female at a sporting event in the stands and is having a atypical presentation, diaphoresis, and our clinical dietitian shows up and suggests that maybe they're hypoglycemic, offers something to eat, some glucose, progresses, doesn't get better, starts having shoulder pain, lightheadedness, and from there it continues to get worse until the patient actually passes out, goes into VFib, and we go right into the cardiac arrest. And we have the athletic trainer is called, arrives with the AED, and we go through the entire CPR process with who we have on hand until EMS arrives. We do that transfer of there. I would say what our group was really great at was the debriefing questions. I can't believe we got to it, but some of the things that our group came up with is what safety issues may need to be considered and may impact the scenario of cardiac arrest in a public place, such as a sporting event. Analyzing the risk of helping in something beyond your scope of practice where you may not be familiar with, and actually doing that. Where does the Good Samaritan law fall into place, and so forth. And then how comfortable are we as young emerging professionals actually performing care in a non-typical hospital outpatient environment. One more. Yeah, we did. Yeah, go ahead. And then the last one was, what barrier or fears do we have jumping in and assisting with CPR, even if we have BLS training?
And I want to jump off there and speak to the story from Thursday. So this is out on Lake Michigan Drive. A car went off just past the bridge, as you move over toward Allendale from Grand Rapids to there. Went off into this really muddy median, so it came to a halt there. It wasn't a motor vehicle crash. The PT student pulled over about the same time that a volunteer firefighter pulled over. He had gotten there and started pulling the gentleman out of the vehicle. And so she helped with that. Then, he said, well, we've got to do something. He assessed the pulse. There's no pulse. He started compressions. She had just, for the first time, completed her BLS recently, had her nice brand new pocket mask from CPR training in her car, went and got that mask. She did breaths while he did compressions. And by the way, by this point, there were people standing all around and nobody offering to do anything, just standing, just watching. They're sitting there like working like crazy and people are just standing there. Finally, another person pulls up. She was a nurse, said she had been a nurse for 20 years, offered to, I think she said, I can do whatever you want to do. The volunteer firefighter said, you can do compressions. He kind of wanted to just be done and out of it. So she jumped in, did compressions. PT student continued breathing, and then EMS showed up. But she said it was amazing how many people were there and not doing anything. And so had she not jumped in, this would have been this lone firefighter who's trying to manage the whole thing by himself until that nurse showed up. And what if that nurse decided not to stop? So just in talking to the PT student a little bit about this, her bottom line is, if you've been trained, stop and offer to help and offer to do something, And I really like the debrief questions that they asked in terms of sort of thinking about what are your limits, think about that ahead of time because you're not going to think clearly at the time. And I love the idea of introducing what you can offer to do rather than introducing yourself as your discipline. I think those are some really important takeaways.
Especially if you're not a medical doctor.
Right.
But their question, which goes into the scenario, is the Good Samaritan law. Does anybody know the Good Samaritan law? Yeah. What is it?
That you have to stop in a situation like that, and if you just do something wrong, you're not going to be charged for
Held
that.
liable for that.
As long as you're good.
You're not acting recklessly.
You're not doing something egregiously bad, which you're all in health professions, you're not going to do that. So, but yeah, you're protected, and it's your duty, it's your responsibility. Here's a PT student, right, that was actively involved in saving this guy's life.
And he did live, by the way. It was a cardiac arrest, and he was resuscitated.
It's a great story. We've got a few other questions that we want to go. Lisa, did you have a couple?
Well, it looks like we're at 6:35, so I think it's time to probably wrap up.
Maybe any last dying questions you guys have for the EMS personnel we have here? Because this may be one of the few opportunities you have.
You're just teasing. You guys are the only ones that didn't do it.
All right, well, thank you for coming. This is a lot of fun.